8:35, David Stokes, good friend of the show. He's also a policy analyst with the Show Me Institute, an independent think tank in the Central West End. Good morning, David Stokes.
Good morning, McGraw. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning, David.
Tell your wife that she's not going to talk to me for another week. We'll talk healthcare next week. But with the flood of TIFs that have come out with Boeing, and then you had the Whole Foods TIF, and then you had the IKEA TIF inside a TIF, and then what's going on here? Is this good that businesses are all moving in, or is this bad that everyone's getting a free lunch?
Well, it's both. I mean, it's certainly good that IKEA is coming to Midtown, and as you said, it's a TIF within a TIF. They won't be passing a new TIF for the IKEA. It's locating within a large area TIF, and as such, it's going to get those benefits from there. And it will keep a large number of the taxes that it generates.
Right.
So be it earnings tax, sales tax, or property tax, it's going to generate a lot of the first, probably a lot of all three.
Right.
The Whole Foods, of course, was separate. That's part of a new development right by our offices at Euclid and West Pine.
Right.
And that development and those developers, Mills Property, will get a very substantial TIF for that as well. And then there's the Boeing thing, which when people talked about the state subsidy, it was sort of underplayed that a county TIF is also a requirement. So they're having a special meeting of the county council this morning to pass that quickly.
Right. And then I'm sure the city might be in on that somewhere because they're talking about the city land because it's near the airport or it's part of the airport land or something. So the city is going to get in on the game as well.
It might be. I'm not sure the exact details. And frankly, I don't know if they even know like exactly where Boeing would
Right.
go if they choose to come here.
But
Let's take each. That's one where the company bought the building that was there, that had businesses in there, that had medical offices,
Right.
and they tore it down. And then they came back to the city and said, well, it's blighted. Well, sure, because you tore down the building that was there. Like, the same people owned the building, had a business, had a office building there,
Right.
tore it down, left it sit vacant for years, didn't do anything with it, and now are asking for subsidies because it's blighted. Well, they blighted it.
right.
So the IKEA one probably fits pretty well to your point. Yes, that's been that area with a lot of thrift stores. I mean, I drive it all the time.
Right.
That has been vacant for some time, and now IKEA's going to go there, and that's great. I mean, I think everybody's happy about this, but please, the Post-Dispatch had a nice story on how substantial the tax subsidies to IKEA are. But, IKEA's just probably loving it because they don't have to wage now a PR campaign to get it. It's just a big Cordish area TIF.
Right.
So anybody who locates in there gets those subsidies.
Right. Then you get the Boeing, and here's where you and I agree and disagree on all this, and this is where this sort of the ground is always moving. So Boeing gets the TIF, and from what we're reading in STLtoday.com, that there was a deal made between the governor and some senators, and the governor said, "Hey, we'll revisit tax credit reform in this next legislature session if you allow this Boeing tax credit to go through," which is the definition of picking winners and losers. So we'll give Boeing the TIF. Let's sort of knock out or cut back on historic tax credits and other things. Seems to me like if a tax credit is good for Boeing, why is then a tax credit bad for historic development?
Well, you're right to that last point. I mean, it is picking winners and losers here, and that's unfortunate. But I guess I disagree with you in that if this Boeing deal, and I have no idea if Boeing is coming or not,
right.
and I hope that they do.
Sure.
But all the business experts that we're seeing, and I think that you've quoted on this show,
right.
seem to say that St. Louis's chances are very low.
Right.
So I'm just quoting other people who
Yeah,
apparently know
right.
what they're talking about.
Right.
But
Which is
if
always
it-
dangerous.
Right. If it is what we need to actually get a cap on low-income housing tax credits and historic preservation tax credits and film tax credits and all these other programs that we have, which spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year, if this is what we need to finally start going in the right direction and get some cutbacks on that, then that would be a good ending to the story.
But they literally are choosing Boeing over a dilapidated building, which some developer needs some financial help because it's more expensive to fix up an old building. So that building will sit dilapidated because we have to put a cap on these historic tax credits because Boeing needs their new building.
Right. I think we should put a cap on historic tax credits, Boeing or no Boeing. I
Right.
think that just needs to be done. We are, if not the most generous state forum in the country, we're right at the top, to the point where they're paying people now to go out and find now semi-historic buildings that might qualify, because
Right.
we've addressed many of the genuinely historic buildings. And just because a building in the city of St. Louis or other parts of Missouri is old doesn't make it historic.
Right.
And we're using these things on homes, on older homes in gated communities. There's nothing public about that. We're
Right.
using them on country clubs like Norwood Hills, and we have a video up on that at showmeinstitute.org. Obviously, I sort of like that that expenditure.
As a member of Norwood Hills Country Club.
But I don't think the club should have gotten it, obviously. So we've gone to this extent of using it on really nice homes in gated communities and other. We've gone way too far with it, and I think it would be a good thing to cut back on that.
Would Norwood Hills have done their rehab if they hadn't gotten their historic tax credit?
I don't know. I would think yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's the $64,000 question is, would these, you would at least agree that at some point the historic tax credit was beneficial. Would you not?
Yeah. We're so out of whack
Washington
with it.
Avenue has been redeveloped because of it.
True, but for every time you see something that the subsidies made something happen, you have to try to think to yourself, what would have happened otherwise? And maybe it's not what I'm speaking you generally here,
Right.
like. Maybe it would have gone back to the burbs for more development in the suburbs. And if you like the city of St. Louis, as we all do, we love seeing Washington Avenue redeveloped. I used to live downtown, so I love seeing what Washington Avenue has become. But there's always something that would have happened otherwise if you hadn't taken that money from taxpayers and had politicians say, let's give it to people who are going to do what we approve of.
Right.
That money would have been invested. It wouldn't have sat in a mattress.
Yeah, I find it interesting. It's such a great argument because I agree with you and others who talk about Walmart. Why does Walmart, the biggest retailer in the world, need a subsidy from Ellisville to build something that they're going to build anyway? And you're taking that, I'm going to buy sneakers from somewhere else, and now I'm going to buy it at Walmart because it's cheaper. So you just put mom and pop out of business. And the hardware store is a perfect example. Right, there used to be mom and pop hardware stores all over the place, but now they're going by like the dinosaur because everyone's giving TIFs to Home Depot and Menards and Lowe's and everything else. So I get that, but I for some reason I have a visceral reaction to the cap on a historic tax credit because it's sort of like eating our young. Right? These are old buildings that would not be saved except for the fact that this historic tax credit's there. And it's harder and more expensive to rehab a brick building built 100 years ago than it is a 1950s, 60s style ranch in Florissant. So there needs to be some government assistance to help save some of this great architecture.
Well, and I think it's important to remember, though, that the subsidy out there, yes, it helps people do that. But again, in all these cases, with this the most generous program in the country, Oregon among them, is it always right to take tax dollars from people around the state of Missouri and say, we value the old homes in the city of St. Louis and elsewhere, it's not
Right.
just in St. Louis, so much that we want to take money from the taxpayers in the suburbs or rural Missouri or wherever and spend it here. And I don't think it is. I think you would still have redevelopment. That's one of the issues in the debate. It starts to get to it's either we have all of it or none of it. yes, we have more historic tax renovation because of the subsidy. But it's not that we would have absolutely none of it without it. We'd have more homes that were just a developer buys it, tears the whole home down, and starts from scratch without the subsidy.
Yeah.
That's how you would deal with it. Some people will recoil at that thought. I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea. Not all of these homes, again, are historic just because they're old.
I was reading something over the weekend. I think it was in the Post-Dispatch, stltoday.com, and I forget which article I was reading. But it was basically talking about the chances of Boeing coming to St. Louis. And while Seattle's a better option, maybe South Carolina, maybe Texas, and they said that Texas is known to just write checks to these companies. Well, we just went through this summer. Texas is a great place to do business because we're growing jobs. Well, wait a minute. If they're writing checks to these people, that's a form of a major subsidy. No one within Texas is complaining about writing checks to these companies to bring it down there. So, and yet we sit here and we say, well, wait a minute, maybe that's not right. Whereas Texas is doing it tenfold and then coming up to St. Louis and saying, hey, it's better in Texas. So it seems like we're our own worst enemy in this.
Well, it isn't right. Nobody would say that these types of mass subsidies, I shouldn't say nobody. Few people would say that this is good policy.
Right.
And there's a great article that you've probably read because it's been spread around social media in the last 24 hours. A columnist in the Seattle Times wrote about how is this really how we've gotten to this sort of vast corporatist model where corporations just get to send demands to government and say, we might locate there if you do all. I mean, is this our only option? And this is where what we believe at the Show Me Institute and what I believe, I mean, free market beliefs are not about corporatism. Free markets are about, keeping tax rates low for everybody and then letting competition play out.
Right.
And we've gone way too far in this country for subsidizing corporate welfare. And we do, in some states like Texas, abuse it rampantly.
Right. Now, but lastly, even if that tax would have gone through this last fall, which everyone said Nixon vetoed, even if that would have gone through, I don't think that would have stopped. I don't think Boeing would have got a cheaper deal if that tax would have gone through. They would have gotten the same exact deal. So it isn't like lower taxes would have helped anybody out. We all would have gotten lower taxes. Boeing still would have gotten the deal, and we'd still have to make up the money somewhere else.
That's true because the Boeing deal is so immediately after the tax cut, and a phased-in tax cut would have taken a long time. So they would have. But in the long run, if we can start going in that direction, the whole state's economy will benefit.
David Stokes, Show Me Institute. When can we read you? When can we see you?
Well, you can read a great deal on tax increment financing and tax credits at showmeinstitute.org, and you can check out tax data comparing Texas, Missouri, and elsewhere at showmedata.org.
Tell your wife she owes me a Christmas present after next week's show.
Yeah, when are we going to hear about this?
She's still not talking to me for another week, but next week she's going to buy me a gift certificate somewhere.
I believe so. I think this is news to her, but all right.
David Stokes, be good. Talk to you next Monday. 8:48 here, Big 550.